Hi, everyone. Welcome to the lecture series on Lattice for Beyond the Standard Model Physics. My name is Ethan Neal. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. So I'll be giving you 3 lectures on this subject. And today in lecture 1, we're going to start with the second part of the title, the BSM part. So we're going to talk about strongly coupled physics beyond the standard model. So let me start by giving you an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start with some motivation for doing lattice QCD without the QCD part. And then I'm going to get into the bulk of the lecture, which is going to be talking about strongly coupled models of new physics. And there's sort of 2 that I'm going to get into in particular detail: composite Higgs and composite dark matter. Those are the ones that motivate a lot of existing lattice studies so far, but also go through some other possibilities. So, the spirit of all this is very much kind of exploration. This is a field that has a lot of opportunities to do new things in it. And to go new directions. And so my main hope in this lecture series is to sort of give you a taste of what's possible and what's out there, and maybe to inspire some of you to go study something new. And then finally, in the third part of the lecture, after I go over the specific models, I'm going to give a few slides on what I call how to talk to phenomenologists, and that's going to be about translating what you do on the lattice to experiment, to actually apply to these models in practice. Okay. So let's go ahead with the motivation. As I said, I call this lattice QCD without the QCD. And the reason I say that is because I have to specify what the theme of these lectures means, because there are multiple contexts for physics beyond the standard model. And in fact, a lot of the other lectures you're going to hear about at this school, a lot of the other things you're going to hear about are motivated by physics beyond the standard model. That's the reason we do a lot of lattice QCD calculations. Like, for example, mu on G minus 2. There are hints of potentially new physics there. Lattice calculations of the hadronic vacuum polarization, like here, can make a big difference. Other examples are, say, computing nuclear form factors for dark matter. That's a lattice QCD calculation, but it's relevant for new physics beyond the standard model. A large fraction of the whole flavor physics program that we're so tied into in lattice QCD, and that you'll hear about at this school, is motivated by searching for new physics in exotic decays and things like that. That is not the point of these lectures. So, that sort of broad motivation of searching for new physics by being more precise about how we calculate things in QCD, that's a great motivation of a lot of things. What I want to focus on in this lecture is specifically the use of lattice methods for theories that are not QCD. So this is a very different approach to trying to use lattice methods to help in this search for new physics. Okay. This also helps me narrow the scope of the lectures to be at least sort of manageable. Okay. So what that means is that what we want to think about in particular is models of new physics beyond the standard model, which are strongly coupled and composite. And I'm going to use these 2 words sort of interchangeably for the most part: composite and strongly coupled. And you might ask to begin with, why do these ideas have to be related to each other? And the sort of key point here is confinement. Confinement is the idea that unites strongly coupled and composite. Okay. And it's kind of intuitive they come together. Of course, these ideas all come together in QCD. But in general, if you're interested in new physics, this is what makes a lot of the models viable, basically. Okay, so what do I mean by that? If you have a confining theory, it has some confinement scale lambda. And roughly speaking, any sign that you have a composite theory, any sign that there's additional structure to the particles in your theory, is hidden until you get beyond this confinement scale. Okay. The alternative, if you want to have a composite that doesn't have confinement, that isn't strongly coupled, of course, there are examples of that in nature, right? Atoms, of course, are composites of electrons and protons and neutrons, but they don't require strong coupling. They're composites of the electromagnetic force. The reason that that's harder to build into new physics models is just that would require a new long-range force, and the existence of such things is heavily constrained. Okay. Now, strongly coupled means that we have to turn to lattice calculations. It means we can use Lattice to make quantitative predictions in cases where perturbation theory, where all else fails, basically. We can make predictions. We can understand things about these composite models using Lattice. But a fair question is, why is this worth doing? Right? Lattice calculations are difficult. They're expensive. And these theories may or may not even exist. These are just hypothetical theories of new physics. So why is this worth doing? Of course, so reason one is just that there is new physics beyond the standard model, right? So this is worthwhile for the same reason that any search for new physics is worthwhile, that we know the standard model is not complete. We know there has to be some other pieces to the puzzle. And so if Lattice can help with that, then it's worth doing. And there's basically, I like to think of there being sort of two categories of reasons that we think there's new physics out there. One, the standard model is incomplete, and I'll call this sort of the experimentalist's complaint. This is ways in which there's pieces missing from how we understand the world. Things that we know must exist that are not contained in the standard model. Okay. So the most popular example here, or the most common example, would be dark matter, which I'll say a little bit more later on when I get to composite dark matter. There's a separate set of complaints that the standard model is unsatisfying, is the way I'll phrase it. And these are the theorists' complaints about the standard model, that it sort of works in practice to describe the world, but there are features about it that we don't understand, or that don't really, from a theoretical perspective, don't make sense based on our current understanding of how QFT works, basically. So everyone's favorite example of this is called the Higgs hierarchy problem. I'll assume everyone has heard about in some way. It's the fact that the Higgs mass is unnatural. It requires some cancellation, some fine tuning at some large scale, or something else we don't understand going on, basically. Yeah, so the standard model as is unsatisfying. So these are the two broad categories of reasons that we really think there's new physics out there, and that it's worthwhile to search for it. Okay, so this is kind of a broad motivation. I can give a more specific motivation as well. And the more specific reason that we want to do lattice studies of these of theories that aren't QCD is because they're there, right? There's this whole space of strongly coupled theories. We have one really good example that we know in nature, which is QCD, and we know that example very thoroughly. We have lots of experiments. We have lattice QCD. We know everything there is to know about QCD, basically, compared to all of these other theories that exist, right? You can change the gauge group. You can change the number of fermions. I'll talk about the variations in a future lecture. But there's this whole space of interesting strongly coupled quantum field theories, and we don't really know much about the general structure of them. Okay. And this is sort of an orthogonal motivation, but this is nice because this means that if you do a lattice simulation and you're studying a theory that's relevant for your favorite model of composite dark matter or whatever like that. So let me draw a little diagram here. So I have my model A. Maybe composite dark matter, maybe something else. So to understand the physics of this dark matter model, I need to understand some strongly coupled gauge interactions that are sitting underneath it. I'll call that X. X is my theory, my strongly coupled theory, and this sort of feeds into A. So info from my lattice simulations fixes, the values of certain parameters in this theory, is something like that. But now, I do these simulations. It takes me a year or two, and I learn a bunch about model A, and then some experiment comes along, and it rules out model A. So now I've wasted all my time in learning the parameters of model A, is the bad news. But the good news is that I've still learned about model X, right? And this is one model in this big unknown space of theories. And if I've studied multiple different models, or me and other groups have studied different models that are sort of similar, that feed into, say, similar dark matter models, even if individual ones are ruled out, from the lattice simulations themselves, we learn something about strongly coupled field theory. Maybe they'll reveal some pattern that we didn't know before, for example. Okay. This is the motivation for why it's worthwhile to spend the effort to do a lattice calculation to study these theories, as compared to doing phenomenology for Model A, which requires some grad student to run Monte Carlo simulations for a week, something like that. This is much more expensive, but we get a lot more out of this than we do just doing Monte Carlo simulations, because we learn about the underlying theory, not just about the model. Okay. And you can make connections not just to phenomenology through this, but maybe X is interesting directly to formal theorists, condensed matter theorists, something, you name it. Okay. So I use some terminology here that I should explain because I'm going to continue to use this. It's the word model versus the word theory. Okay, so model, this is the new physics. This is appropriate for phenomenology. This is what the phenomenologist would write down. Describe, how you see this dark matter in a detector, how you search for this composite whatever at the LHC, things like that. Theories are what we study. These are strongly coupled. These are what we put on the lattice. And there's not really any difference between, these words are kind of interchangeable. So this is strictly, I'm not defining these terms for everyone. This is strictly within the context of these lectures. I'm going to use model to refer to the thing that phenomenologists care about, and theory to refer to the thing that we on the lattice care about. And this is just to make the language a little bit easier, basically, because these are both sort of spaces of theories, and we have two different spaces of theories that are interconnected in some complicated way. And I want to distinguish them. Okay. So, for example, here, I can have QCD. This is, in my lingo, this is a theory. This is the strongly coupled theory. And if we take this and we match down to low energies, we get, say, chiral perturbation theory, which describes just the pions and their interactions, and this would be the model. Okay, so this is the idea. Now, in this case, there's a one-to-one map. Now, suppose I want to go to some new physics model, so I have some composite dark matter model. And now I simulate, I don't know, some SU4 gauge theory. I say that matches onto my composite dark matter model. Yeah. So I put the theory on the lattice. I learned some things non-perturbatively about this. It gives me inputs to the model. There's something new that happens when we move away from QCD, which is now in many cases there's an ambiguity, right? Someone else could come along and say, well, I think this should be SU5 or SU6, or make other changes to the theory. And now because the thing that we're interested in, the dark matter physics, is only sensitive to the details of the model and not necessarily the full UV completion, we have an inverse problem. By which I mean, if we just, if we have experimental evidence of dark matter, for example, we don't know enough to match on to what the actual UV theory underneath it is. Even if we're sure this is composite dark matter, we may not know which one of these completions it actually is. The only way to know that is quantitatively, is to compare the results of lattice simulations for our different choices of theory and see which one gives the correct parameters for the model. Okay. So one more reason that we really need lattice to sort of understand the complete picture of these composite models. I should say, just as sort of a parting thought on this, there are constraints on this inverse problem. There are certain things we can say even before we turn the computer on, just based on symmetries, things that survive the strong coupling limit. For example, if this composite dark matter model requires the dark matter to be a fermion or a boson, that will actually rule out some of these theories. immediately. We'll talk more about that in the next lecture.